All right, it's a big-time win for the New Orleans Pelicans as they top the number 1 seed in the Western Confernce with a victory over the Clippers. It was a balanced effort, but you saw Zion Williamson close the game out. Let's break down what we saw, plus even more trade rumors for the Pelicans in the lead up to Thursday's NBA trade deadline. We're going to make sense of all of it here in a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on a Thursday. Technically, we're live late on Wednesday night after the Pelicans beat the Los Angeles Clippers, the then number 1 team in the Western Conference, 117-106. Clippers not going to be number 1 anymore after this loss. On the road, start of a 4-game road trip, big-time victory. You saw the star players have a balanced scoring effort in this one, saw some great defense. We're going to break it all down, plus the newest batch of trade rumors around the Pelicans, because there are more. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. Today and every day, we are here, the number 1 Pelicans podcast every single day, breaking down what we see on the court, the trade rumors, making sense of everything going on around this team. That was a fun victory. So be sure to become an everydayer if you're not already. If you are an everydayer, let me know in the comments. I'm looking at them right now. We might even do a little bit of a bonus segment for a couple minutes after we do the main show here. Hang out with y'all after this very big and impressive win for the Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first-time deposit match up to $100. Okay, so the Pelicans getting a massive win over the Los Angeles Clippers. Look, there's going to be people who try and discredit this win, right? That first game back after a long road trip, which the Clippers were on the East Coast, is actually tough. It can be very much a trap game for many of these home teams. The Pelicans faced that against the Utah Jazz. You know what they did? They put up a record number of points in that game. After a long road trip, coming back, or maybe it was Charlotte, whatever it was, they crushed the opponent. So there's no real excuse for not getting it done at home. For a Pelicans team that has maybe struggled a little bit against some of the top teams in the Western Conference, to come out and get the win over this Clippers team was very impressive. They came out with the right kind of energy. They were flying around on defense. They were working in tune, in rhythm offensively. Guys were just straight up stepping up. It's exactly what you want to see from this team. For a team that's had questions around, say, their energy level, kind of readiness, preparedness, at times chemistry, even though that's BS. They quiet all of that down with this victory here. This is an impressive win, and it doesn't matter if people try and discredit anything like that. This was a game that the Pelicans took to the Clippers, and the Clippers did not respond, but you gotta take it to them in the first place, and the Pelicans did. You saw balanced scoring in this one, right? It was Brandon Ingram early, then Trey Murphy in the first quarter. CJ McCollum was consistently hitting shots, hitting threes throughout all of this one. And then Zion came alive in the fourth quarter. I don't have the fourth quarter numbers yet because it hasn't updated on the NBA stats website. But if someone could tell me in the chat how many points Zion scored in the fourth, that would be great. But he had a quiet game. And on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, I posed a question here of, what did you think of Zion's first half? Everyone liked that he was active on defense, and he was trying. That's some of the best individual one-on-one defense we've seen from him in a while. When he commits on that side of the ball, he can be useful there. But it was also we're running the offense through him. They were going point Zion a lot, and it was generating open looks for teammates. But at a certain point, you'd want him to just be a little bit more aggressive. He was far too passive, I thought, in the first half. In the second half, he started to come alive here, and then I think you really saw him get aggressive, start going, and then just take over the game. And that's what you wanted to see. He realized that he was unstoppable. Someone says he thinks Zion had 13 in the fourth. That's how you close a game out. He realized that the Clippers couldn't do a thing to stop him, and he was getting some space because CJ was hitting shots. Others were doing their job here. Even Brandon Ingram was kind of taking threes. Took 4. It's better than the 2 we are kind of expecting after something like this. So for him to go out and just dominate the game and slam that door shut on the Clippers, I thought was really tremendous, and it's the main reason they won this game. When your star players playing like that, look at how easy things were for CJ McCollum. CJ had 25 points. He was the game high for the Pelicans in this one. He was actually the game high overall for both teams. He looked great. You had Herb Jones hitting some threes, hitting his shots, right? You had Brandon Ingram getting into his spots, taking his shots again in rhythm. He finished with 15 points, 6 assists, 8 rebounds. That's a real good stat line. Zion, 21, 10 assists here, was fantastic. Starting to get a little bit more active on the glass, which was important. He had a big-time offensive rebound of his own miss, put it back up, scored. You want your star players to carry you down the stretch. For a team that has had some trouble closing out games, particularly against good teams here, where there were questions about where do they kind of fit in the Western Conference hierarchy, to see Zion take over a quarter like that and just go and do his thing and slam the door shut on the Clippers is exactly what you wanted to see. This was the Pelicans answering a question here, right? I see it's Alexander Newcomb says, CJ's a dog, most consistent player we have. Like, yeah, he was great in this game too. I really thought everyone played well. Once Zion again came alive and just decided to go to the rim and score that way, 21 points on 16 shots is very good efficiency right there. You're going to be pretty happy with that kind of performance from him. This is why the right players getting the right kind of shots is important. We've seen the Pelicans not shoot enough threes. And it's not if they take 40 more threes, they win games. There's not a target number. I go on WWL, and Bobby Aber asked me this the other time I was on, of what's the magic number? It's not a number. They took 32 threes in this game, and they still won the game and kind of won it handily, right? It's 11-point victory, but really for midway through the fourth quarter, it was like 15 to 16 points that they were just leading by, right? They had a 17-point lead in this game. They looked sharp. They led wire to wire. The Clippers just never had anything, and when the Clippers would go on runs, the Pelicans would answer. This says a lot about the team here. They can win in a variety of different ways, but when CJ's taking 11 threes, when Trey Murphy is taking 8 threes, when Herb Jones goes 2 of 3, you can get by, even with Brandon Ingram taking 4, but you'd like that number to be up a little bit. But in a win like this, you're not going to complain that much about how everyone played, and it was just a strong all-around performance here. So let's get into some of the other guys, because the defense was excellent. Herb Jones was a monster in this game. Dyson Daniels was fantastic. Larry Nance Jr. was great. Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson. I want to look at that and talk about their performances here in this game. We maybe have a bit of an update on Jonas Valanciunas. Notice Najee Marshall, I don't think, played a single minute in this game, and that's kind of surprising to see. So all of those things we want to take a look at and talk about, because that's kind of surprising, unless I missed something with Najee Marshall, which maybe I did, because he's listed as inactive, which was a little surprising. Maybe I missed something with him here. But yeah, good performances all around. Let's talk about the defense, everything else coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, I'm excited to tell you about Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventures could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drivers and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything, and gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store are all built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is a perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. There's also the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, part of Nissan's incredible lineup. Has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. So take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday breaking down everything you want to know about this team, including the big victories like this one over the Los Angeles Clippers. They were the number one team in the West. They're not anymore after this loss at the hands of the New Orleans Pelicans, with everyone really contributing and really stepping up for this team. It was a great performance, a good win. Don't take anything away from the Pelicans here. So love to see what they did on this one. Not an easy win to go and get, and they delivered in this one. And we're going to get into some trade rumors in the third segment of today's show. There's even more. So the trade deadline is fast approaching. It's literally like 12 hours from now or so. And Locked On Fantasy Basketball is your place for live reaction Thursday at noon Central. Subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube today so you don't miss Josh Lloyd, the GOAT, breaking down every NBA trade with analysis and insight you can only get from Locked On Fantasy Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, become an everydayer to Locked On Pelicans. Listen Monday through Friday. We are the number one Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know. Trade rumors, the win like this. It was a great performance all around. So let's get back to the Pelicans' victory over the Los Angeles Clippers, 117-106 here. The defense was good. The defense in this one was good. And again, there's some sluggishness to the Clippers, probably their bodies being on East Coast time. That's true. But look, Kawhi Leonard was held to just 15 points. He's been excellent. Paul George was 3 of 15 for just 7 points. You could argue it's one of the worst performances of his career, I would assume. I would assume that's absolutely one of the worst performances he's had. James Harden was good, 19 points. He was efficient there. But by and large, the Pelicans really limited the Clippers. They do what they do and played good defense on the perimeter, didn't let them get inside nearly as much as they would have liked to do, forced them into bad shots, and it's why they won the points in the paint battle 54-38. And that's a significant improvement right there. They also forced 19 turnovers on the Clippers, led to 20 fast break points. So the Pelicans were winning almost basically like every area you could possibly want. The only real downside or negative I saw from the Pelicans in this game, other than a few nitpicky things, was like at one point turnovers kind of crept up at the end of the first half. Then they ironed that out, and this team just kind of cruised again to a wire-to-wire victory over the number one team, the former, we should say, number one team in the Western Conference. Herb Jones was an absolute monster in this game, in my opinion. He looked so good. He doesn't have a steal or a block, but his defense was outstanding. He rises to the occasions, and if this isn't the year that he gets on the all-defensive team, like if he doesn't, I don't know what's going on there. It will have been wrong. Straight up, it would have been wrong. He was that good in this game. He was outstanding in going out and playing so hard and was key for why those 2-3 best players for the Los Angeles Clippers really struggled. He plays well against those guys for the most part. You know, you saw a number of different players on Kawhi Leonard. You saw Brandon Ingram guard him. You saw Zion Williamson guard him. You saw Herb Jones guard him too. And Dyson Daniels. And they just were just a terror in this one, right? Dyson Daniels had 4 steals and 2 blocks off the bench. You know, as we talk trade rumors, there might be teams that want Dyson Daniels in there, but if you can get out and get 20 points in the fast break and force 19 turnovers, that seems like a piece that you probably want to keep on this team, especially if he can get some offense developing here. But it's also why you can get away with playing Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas, where they aren't known as good defenders, yet you still have a good defense because of the exceptional play from Herb Jones and Dyson Daniels. One of those guys can be on the court at any given time. That is a nightmare for opponents, I think. And so keeping those guys, I think, is going to be kind of key. Obviously, Herb Jones isn't going anywhere. You know, for the right deal, maybe they would include him in a trade. Sure. But you're not just looking to part with Herb Jones. He's that good and he's on that good of a contract. And when Dyson comes in again with 4 steals, 2 assists, if he could just generate a little bit of offense here. And look, off the bench, he had 10 points. I don't hate those numbers from him, right? You know, 4 rebounds. He's got good size, elite defense. That's a guy that can become a difference maker here. And it just means you have a good defender on the court every single moment of the game. And that was exactly what you want to see from these guys. They're just stepping up in kind of one of the biggest games, right? The Pelicans have seemed, you know, at times allergic to big time games, big time performances here. And they didn't in this one, right? They again led wire to wire, and this was their depth shining through. So that's, I think, a big part of why they won, the defense. Willie Green said after the first quarter, they're like, what's the key to getting a win? And he's like, well, we got to keep playing defense. If they can keep forcing turnovers like that and disrupting opponents' best players who played really well, right? Kawhi Leonard is going to start to be in the MVP conversation if he's not already in there, especially with the Joel Embiid injury. And he just had a not good game against this team. If you get into a playoff series with this team, who beat New Orleans pretty badly in New Orleans, I think you could still maybe get a victory here because you have guys like Dyson Daniels and Herb Jones that are so disruptive that seem to be not quite kryptonite for Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, but we've seen this before. Right? We've seen Kawhi Leonard, when he's been on the Clippers, have poor games against New Orleans because of the defense that they throw out there. So it's been just some very good performances there. And, I loved seeing both those guys step up. Makes you reconsider whether Dyson Daniels, Herb Jones won't be in a trade. Dyson Daniels could be. After a performance like this, you want to trade him? I don't want to trade him. He looked that good in this one. Another guy who also looked pretty good was Larry Nance Jr. He looked at times like a point forward for this team, dishing the ball, particularly in the first half. Jonas Valanciunas only played 10 and a half minutes in this game. He left with a calf contusion, didn't return in the second half. Larry Nance Jr. really stepped up. Off the bench, he was a plus of 13. They won his minutes out there. He had a couple of really strong rebounds. He was active on the defensive side of the ball, fighting for things, giving us that hustle we wanted to see. He didn't really score, but didn't need to in this game, and was deferring and just being part of the flow, part of the offense, right? This is the depth of the Pelicans shining through. It works around the star players so well. And then you have Trey Murphy, who also looked great, particularly in that first quarter, 11 of his 13 points. Like to see a little bit more consistency coming back to him, but look, the fact that he kind of broke out, woke up in that quarter, I think makes teams very scared about what he could become, and just adds another piece for the Pelicans that they really need as they look to try and build offensively on things. You're going to be good defensively with one of Herb Jones and Dyson Daniels out there. Leaning more in on offense is the way to keep pressure on opponents. They did it, particularly with Zion closing the game out. He had space to work in that fourth quarter. That's rare. It shows all of the pieces out around him were exactly what you needed. It led to a good performance. Jose being a spark plug off the bench, giving you some offense as well. Love to see it from him. Just a great performance all around. Like, this was a very strong win for the New Orleans Pelicans. Don't let anyone take away from them and say this was the Clippers being tired. Yes, there's some of that, but absolutely, this was the Pelicans won this game. So loved seeing that from them. Let's get into trade talks a little bit, because there's more trade rumors. We're about 12 hours away from the NBA's trade deadline. Then we'll stay live for maybe another 15 minutes after here on YouTube only, and answer some of your questions, interact with the chat, because there's a lot of y'all in here. So save your questions coming up for kind of a bonus fourth segment here. Let's talk trade rumors and all of that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about PrizePicks, because PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS, because it's just you against the numbers. You pick more or less on the stat projection for 2 to 6 players, and you watch the winnings roll in. So PrizePicks is super simple. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. They even offer an injury insurance policy here. If you have a basketball player that exits the game in the first half, doesn't return in the second, that player's projection won't count against you, and the rest of your entry stays alive. So PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. And they offer weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday each Tuesday. Discounts on select players up to 25% gives you even more value. And PrizePicks now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this basketball season. So if you want to get in on the action, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. It's up to $100 as a first-time deposit match when you go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA. PrizePicks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know, whether it's trade rumors, which we're about to get into, the big wins, the X's and O's, the rationale, the rotations, all of that stuff. We cover it all here. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And do me a favor, tell one friend about the show. Tell one friend about the show. Let's grow the show. This team is fun. They're going to be competitive all season long. There might even be a bunch of news to talk about tomorrow. We'll see. So make sure to tell a friend so they know what's going on around this team. For your second listen today, it's a channel I want you to go to. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. So let's get into the latest trade rumors around the Pelicans here. We got a bunch of updates. Nothing that's like hugely surprising, but I think I can lend a little bit of insight into certain things here. So first and foremost, they still are, and most of this comes from Jake Fisher of Yahoo in a notebook that he just recently published today, right? So first and foremost, they said they're looking to upgrade the center position. They had reached out to the Cavaliers about Jared Allen and saying, Cavaliers are not trading Jared Allen or Evan Mobley. Nothing like that's going to happen here. Don't expect either of those two to come to New Orleans. Sounds like they also had called the Orlando Magic about Wendell Carter Jr. We had listed him here as a potential trade target. That makes a lot of sense, but sounds like the Orlando Magic aren't looking to move him. Again, Wendell Carter Jr. is a downgrade from Jonas Valanciunas, but if you listen to yesterday's show, as we kind of did a trade deadline primer, it really was, I think, mainly because he's under contract multiple years, and it gives the Pelicans kind of some security there because Jonas Valanciunas is out of contract at the end of this season. You know, it sounds like they'd also been in touch, or it's not sounds like, it's been reported that they've also been in touch with the Atlanta Hawks on two different fronts here. First and foremost, it was Clint Capella, Onyeka Okongwu, their centers. Capella would be fine. Okongwu, bringing him in, as a young guy, former first-round pick, high draft pick, hasn't really developed, hasn't ever been a starter. Bringing him in, he would definitely be a downgrade. Capella's could be around the level of JV just in terms of impact. But Okongwu is definitely a downgrade. He's younger, he's cheaper. That's kind of what you're looking for. He's under contract, I think, for another year or two. Doesn't really excite me. I don't think that would be the right move, but you can see maybe the Pelicans are getting like slightly desperate when it comes to trying to find a center position and figure something out. If you're not going to get Miles Turner, if you're not going to get Jared Allen, those are the two that you would really, really like that make a ton of sense. And it doesn't sound like those are options whatsoever for the New Orleans Pelicans. You got to go and do something, and that's what they're trying to figure out. Okongwu signed a big extension, not a big extension, after this year. He makes $14 million next year, 15 after that, 16.12, then 16.88. It's not great for the production that he gives because I don't think he's been particularly good. Now, we'll get to the other part of the Atlanta side of things here in a second. There was one other name listed in there that the Pelicans had reached out to the Detroit Pistons about, not Jalen Duren, you're not going to pry him away from there, but Isaiah Stewart. Beef Stew, one of the better nicknames, I think, in the league. I like the idea of this in theory. He's out injured right now, so that's obviously not ideal, and he's having a bit of a down year for him. He's having probably, a worse year compared to last year for the Pistons, not being nearly as impactful, and his per 36-minute numbers are basically the worst of his career, more or less. He's not shooting particularly as efficiently as he has at times. There's moments when he looks like he could be a good three-point shooter. That's there, but for whatever reason, the numbers just kind of are down because he's not taking as many shots, which I kind of like, but it is a concern that the production is down. Here's the thing with Beef Stew, Isaiah Stewart. It sounds great in theory, but he's undersized. He's 6'8". He's undersized, and he's not nearly as strong of a rebounder as Jonas Valanciunas is. He's about, let me compare his rebounding numbers to Larry Nance Jr. Again, if you're going to trade away Jonas Valanciunas, don't do it for a player that's like Larry Nance Jr., who's already on your team. So Isaiah Stewart is actually a worse defensive rebounder than Larry Nance Jr. is. I just don't see that guy being the answer if his numbers in the one area you really need him to do are worse. He's not bad at blocking shots. I wouldn't call him a rim protector, certainly. He's not horrible at all of that, but he's definitely not like elite at that or at anything. His numbers are right in line with Larry Nance Jr. So I don't know if Isaiah Stewart, unless you just want to go with him and Larry as your centers. But at that point, it just doesn't feel like you need to trade picks or other things like that to bring in a player that, like, to me is a downgrade. If you get rid of Larry, yeah, bring in Isaiah Stewart. That's where we kind of stand with a lot of the rumors, other than one that is surprising, but like not surprising. And that goes back to the Atlanta Hawks. So let's talk about Dejounte Murray. This is the rumor to be the big trade piece, right? Atlanta is disappointing. They need to do something. They traded a bunch of picks for him just a year ago, and it just hasn't worked out whatsoever. So he's potentially going to be on the move. And notice he did not play, I believe, in Wednesday's game against Boston. Now, I don't know if that means anything. Najee Marshall didn't play in this. I don't know if it means he's getting traded or not. In general, teams don't tend to hold guys out. They play them, and then if a deal's coming close, they pull him and don't play him like the remainder of the game. That has happened. I can't think of one instance, actually, where a guy was sat and then traded the next day when we didn't know about the trade beforehand. So Dejounte Murray, is interesting because he's the big name out there, right? This is a guy who's known as a good defensive guard, has good size, is a good rebounder, 6'5", and is shooting the three ball pretty well and can be a lead guard for you. And in general, it feels like the Pelicans could use more lead guardness to them. 21.4 points per game this season, shooting 37% from three on 6 attempts. So here's the thing. It doesn't make sense, right? Murray doesn't make a ton of sense for a team with Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and CJ McCollum. And I would assume you need to trade one of those guys for him. Maybe not, but it seems like you would need to, and that's a little clunky, a little bit weird to me here. So how does that really work out? But say you can't, or say you don't need to trade one of those 3 guys. Why not do this deal? If you can get him for so cheap, you should probably do it. So I think the Pelicans calling about Murray is more to do with kind of bargain shopping. We've seen some of the reported offers out there for him. No team is offering 2 first-round picks for him. The Lakers are offering basically trash and 1 first-round pick, right? They're not including Austin Reeves in a deal. If you can beat the Lakers offer and get him, you can flip him later potentially for more assets. His contract is absolutely fantastic. So I'm wondering if the Pelicans talking to the Atlanta Hawks about Murray is more just hey, we could probably beat almost any offer you're getting. We'll offer a little bit more. You get him out of the East, you send him to us. There you go, problem solved. And I wonder if that's just kind of smart shopping in a sense by David Griffin and the New Orleans Pelicans. They kind of see an opportunity to get a good guy cheap. You can probably then flip him this offseason if you really need to for more. You're adding assets that way. I think that would be really good. If you trade Jonas Valanciunas for him, I think that's a little bit clunky. They could do that, but I don't know if that's the move that you really want to go, because now you're kind of retooling your roster. You're going to be playing Larry Nance Jr., Cody Zeller, all your center minutes with maybe 5 minutes for Zion. Not great, but you could probably get by adding more talent on if that's the case. And then you can really get aggressive this offseason with making some moves. It makes sense. And so from that perspective of just forward thinking, deal with it this year when you're probably not a title contender anyway, go and make that kind of move. Let me know what you think about Dejounte Murray here in the comments on YouTube. There's almost 300 of y'all in here hanging out with me. So let's do a bonus part of Locked On Pelicans. So we're going to end the show normally. You're going to hear me wrap the show up. And then we're going to stay live on YouTube. We're going to get into your questions. So start to put them into the chat here in a second. And we'll go for a little bit longer. It's getting late. It's after midnight, though. So we'll talk for a little bit longer here. I'll answer your questions in the chat. This is the part of the podcast that ends for the people listening on audio. Okay. So hold on a second here. Stay with me. So thank you all so much for listening to Locked On Pelicans. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, the #1 Pelicans podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Tell a friend about the show. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Be back with you all tomorrow to make sense of the NBA trade deadline and everything that happened or didn't happen. See y'all next time. Okay, we're back. We're going still. We'll stay live for a little bit longer here on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube channel. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, if you're here on YouTube with me, let's answer your questions. Tell a friend about the show, all of those things. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below here. So let's dive into some of your things. We'll go for at least 15 minutes and we'll see how it's going after that. So put your questions in the chat. If I don't get to it, the one rule I ask is like, don't spam it. I might be skipping you, I might not be, but if I just don't get to it, another time, and it'll probably get asked elsewhere here. Draft season Shaq says Jake after dark, something like that, right? We're into Thursday here, so there is definitely we're not going to go off the rails here though. Josh L says Jake, is this a good trade? Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance Jr., Najee Marshall, and picks for Murray and Okongwu. Yeah, I don't love it. I don't hate it either. You know, I don't know if you really need to move Larry Nance Jr. for Okongwu. I think that's kind of the issue there, right? Like it's more about Jonas Valanciunas. Having your centers be Jonas Valanciunas and Okongwu doesn't really kind of fix your problem. And that's you Murray, but again, I don't think you really need Murray, so I wouldn't kind of go out and make some of those moves here. Alexander Newcomb says, would you trade Herb Jones and a first for Murray? No, I would not. I would not do that. The salaries wouldn't work anyway, so that trade wouldn't happen here. Mika Vander Frago says, every dayer. Appreciate you being here with me, my man. Tommy Jones says, Zion should work on his mid-range, even though he's a monster down low. Yes and no. Yes and no. I don't want him taking tons of mid-rangers. I don't want him taking threes. I want him just to have the court space for him to go to the rim and score. I agree he needs a little bit more of a mid-ranger just to take every now and then to keep defenses honest, but I don't really want him taking like a ton of mid-range shots or anything like that. So I don't think that's really going to kind of be what he does. He's good at getting to the rim. We want him to do that. Mike Deflexed says, could we package Najee and Nance? I mean, yeah, in theory, you could trade anybody, right? Like you got to give me what that would be for. I don't think you'd get a ton in return for that. You know, that puts you at about, what is that, like $15 million-ish in salary to bring back a player that could get you like a Tyus Jones. But if you get rid of Larry Nance Jr., then who's your backup center when you close games with him, right? Larry Nance Jr. is kind of key for what this team is looking to do, I think. And he's been playing really good basketball. So I don't think you can really go that direction. You know, if you trade a guy and then all of a sudden you don't have a replacement for him, like, I'm not so sure here, right? Mr. Frago says, where's Carlo Makovic? You know, it's been reported that he's going to be here in New Orleans. We saw him at the facility the other day. There's been no official, like he signed a contract with the team. I don't know if they exactly have that sorted out, but I'm sure there's a plan here after the NBA trade deadline. So maybe look for that on like Friday or so here. But you know, I don't know if he'd get tons of minutes, right? EJ Liddell's not getting tons of minutes. I saw a couple of y'all asking about him here in the chat, right? Those guys aren't NBA tested and I don't think would see much of a role here at all this season. This is a team that's going to be competing for a playoff spot, potentially competing for seeding in the playoffs, and then getting to a playoff series. You're not going to trust a dude who just arrived in February, right? Or not you. You know who's not going to trust that guy? The guy that makes the decisions on that, Willie Green, isn't going to trust that guy. And I think that's kind of part of the problem here. Fifth King Corner says, hi, Jake. I understand we need to trade, but would you stick with this roster moving forward? I think we're capable. This roster is undefeated playing with energy like this. I mean, I wouldn't say they're undefeated playing with energy like this. We've seen them lose some games, you know, where they've looked good and then they've blown leads and other things like that. This was a complete game from start to finish, but they do that so inconsistently too that it makes you wonder, you know, all I want this trade deadline, and if you're an everydayer, you know this, is for them not to make a bad move. Don't just force something because you're worried about contracts or what have you. Do not downgrade the team in any capacity. Is what I don't want to see them do. So to me, I don't see a trade out there that makes a ton of sense for the Pelicans. I really don't. You know, I had y'all submit trades for last Friday's show, and like, to me, there were maybe like 3 that like significantly improved the team that I would do that I thought was realistic too, right? Someone traded for LeBron James. That's not going to happen. Yes, that would improve the team. But in the absence of something like that, I would just stick with this roster, even if it means you're not going to have some of the playoff success that you want. They'll be competitive. I think Jonas Valanciunas will be a liability in the playoffs, absolutely. But look, if you trade him and then there's a gaping hole in the center position, how does that impact your playoff seeding in your standings and all of that? So I think that's going to be something that you need to really, worry about here. And we'll see, how much this injury is. If it's a calf contusion, I don't see this being a very big deal. So I don't think this team is going to tank or really worry about anything with that here. So let's keep going. Height Lighthouse says, why not keep JV and just pay the tax? Well, they're not in the tax right now. They don't need to pay the tax. They can keep this roster as is and not pay the tax. So by getting rid of Kira Lewis Jr. earlier, they handled kind of that problem. And I think they're in a good position here, and it'll be totally fine. Todd with the facts says, remember how long Trey sat his rookie year before he came along in the second half of the season? I'm assuming y'all are talking about Hawkins and him getting lack of minutes. It just kind of goes up and down, right? He'll get minutes, he won't get minutes. That's kind of how Willie Green does things here. Tommy Jones says, Jake, the paint tightens up in the playoffs and Zion will need a mid-range jumper. Well, he's not going to develop one by the time the playoffs come around, so just put shooters around him right now and give him some space to work or make teams pay by Trey, by CJ, by Ingram, taking a ton of threes and hopefully making a ton of threes here. Sebastian Zia says, do you think Murray would start or come off the bench if no starters are traded for him? No clue. That's what I mean, right? It's like a clunky fit. No idea. I would assume off the bench, but if no starters are traded, the only guy you're going to drop is Herb, and we just raved about his defense, and Murray's defense has gone down since his trade away from the San Antonio Spurs. So I don't really see that being a smart move, and it was kind of weird with everything. So we'll kind of see here. What could happen, but I think they only do that move if it's so cheap you just kind of have to do it. Have you ever bought something that you don't really need, but you're like, wow, that's such a good deal, it would be stupid not to take advantage of this? That can be a good and bad thing, right? It's smart shopping, but if you don't ever need that thing, it can be a problem. The good thing with NBA players is you can then just trade them. You can't always do that with stuff you just buy. So I don't know if it's the best analogy here. Siap says, would we trade JV for Claxton? Yeah, but would the Nets do that? No. And that's kind of part of the problem. I think Claxton he's an expiring, right? So he's going to get paid. And so you kind of run into a similar position with things. I think, I like Claxton. He's not as good of a rebounder, but he's definitely in there. So I think you could make a move like that. I just don't think it'll be all of that easy to go and get that guy. You need to give up picks. Let me see what his contract is here. He's probably on. So he is not on an extension. So he's out of contract over this year. He might get much more bigger offers, and that puts the Pelicans in a tough position. They'd have his bird right so they can go over the cap to re-sign him. But those are the kind of things you got to think about with some of the trades here when it comes to looking at other guards and things like that. Josh L says, does BI get paid next year? He could be. How comfortable are you giving him a max deal with some of his play? He has those moments where he looks unstoppable. The other night against Toronto in 3 quarters, 41 points. But then he has other games where he just feels a little bit clunky and doesn't fit. And that's where things get a little bit weird for me here with everything. So going to be interesting when it comes to that in a year and what they do with his contract and extension and what, he's under contract for one more year after this, so he's extension eligible this summer. We'll see what happens. Look, if they can sign him for cheaper than a max, you should do it. But then you start to have some questions about team building and all of those things here. Ryan says Kuzma doesn't make sense for us. I didn't see the Kuzma question, but yeah, correct. Kuzma makes no sense for this team. With his contract, it doesn't make sense either for everything here. So no, we don't need. There's a reason I haven't talked about Kyle Kuzma at all for this team here. Do you think more experience would make our current core Ingram, Zion, CJ, Herb, Jonas better? They haven't really played that many games together. So yes and no, right? I've talked about this a lot. Someone was like, is it just as simple as patience, right? After losses, people tend to freak out. Sky is falling. We need to blow them up. The starters have a negative net rating, all of those things. Same point, this team's winning games. They have 30 wins already. They're in a good spot when it comes to that sort of stuff. Do you need to make dramatic changes? Not necessarily. However, you're how many games into the season at this point, right? Like, if it was going to kind of click, it feels like it would have. You're 51 games in and the starters still are struggling. Now, they might have a positive net rating after this game, so it might be getting better. So you can say, like, yeah, patience is important for this team and, they should figure it out, but also they probably should have figured it out by now. I'd like to have seen them look better and less clunky at times. Could still change. I just wouldn't completely bank on that and say that that is going to be an absolute fact. So, yeah, that easily could, but I don't think that's necessarily gonna happen. I hope it will, but I can't tell you 100%. JH15 says Mark Williams. No, like they're not gonna, none of these young centers that y'all want are available for trade at all, right? Jalen Duren isn't getting moved by the Detroit Pistons. So, I don't really look at those because I think those are just not going to happen whatsoever. JJ Hurricane, this is a good question. Any good player in free agency or the buyout market? Not free agency, right? Like if there was anyone you could sign right now that'd be good, a team would have done it. We'll see about the buyout market, but New Orleans has never been an actual like player when it comes to that. They're also pushing close to the luxury tax too. So that's, in mind, you got to keep that in mind with everything. So that's also a factor into this, as well. Like if a guy's like, I want $5 million, they're not going to give a guy $5 million because that puts them into the luxury tax, and that's definitely not going to be great. Chris Gray says, great to see Zion take this game over when it was close. Yep, I agree. That was awesome to see here. Simon Watts says, dude, I'm here live. Yes, finally. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. We do these live shows for you so I can interact with y'all. I know you're excited right after the games. I want to share that excitement with you, talk about what we saw, answer your questions here. It's why we're doing this sort of stuff. So we're having a lot of fun here on the live show. Marley G says, Miles Turner. No, he's like untradeable. Basically, like none of those guys are getting moved this year. Like I think you'll see a lot of minor moves, right? Boston had a trade today. Detroit was making a couple of deals today. Like those are minor moves in the grand scheme of things. I don't think you're going to see like big name players and like explosive details in the next 12 hours. I mean, we'll see, but it just doesn't feel like that's going to be the case here. And so it could just be this team rolls forward as is. And I don't hate that idea for everything here. Seeing some love, but not love for King Cake Baby in the chat. You're saying trade the King Cake Baby. Ryan, no, I actually love King Cake Baby. I think it's really unique, really fun. And I love the idea of what they've done with him. And so no, do not trade King Cake Baby. I would be furious. They actually traded King Cake Baby. You'd get a whole show about that, about me saying how it was maybe the worst move that this team could do here for everything. So one or two more questions here, and we will start to wrap up. Some of y'all are just saying names. Okay. JH15 says Drummond. Yeah, if you're getting rid of Valanciunas, like I wouldn't hate Drummond coming in. He's a very good rebounder. He's having an awesome season, actually. Like if you're just trying to be cheap at that position, Drummond could be like way worse here for everything. Tommy Jones says Walker Kessler would be perfect fit for the Pels, in my opinion. Yeah, but he's not getting traded. Like he's not getting traded. He has a role on a decent team that wants to win, and he looks like a starting center for the future, right? Like he has looked really, really good at times, particularly his rookie year, and there's no way that they're going to move him. This is a guy that is averaging 2.7 blocks per game this year, sometimes starting, sometimes not. Is still a raw prospect. Like he's not getting moved. None of those good young centers are getting moved. So you're not going to end up seeing those guys traded. Kelly Olynyk for cheap. Like, yeah, that makes sense. If you want to go that direction, that's fine. You could definitely get him away from the Utah Jazz with everything. So like, sure, that makes some sense here. I don't know if that's who you really want to roll in with as like your starting center in the playoffs, but certainly that could make some sense. He shoots the three ball very well, doesn't do it on tons of volume this season, but with a bigger role, he would. This is a guy who for his career is 37% from three. He's shooting 43% from three this year. Like that makes sense. I want more shooting with everything. So like, yeah, there you go with all of that stuff. Aaron Herbert says, Abear says, thoughts on Tyus Jones? Love him. Just doesn't really make sense for a trade to happen. Like, love the idea of a stronger backup point guard on this team, but I just don't think that's going to end up being the direction that they go. I think if anything, if they can't make a move for center, they probably just don't do much. Maybe you see Najee Marshall moved, something along those lines here. So we're going to start to wrap up the show here. Simon Watt says, chemistry is too good on this team. No trades. Yeah, but chemistry doesn't win you titles if there's things that need to be addressed. And there definitely still are things that need to be addressed. So that's worth keeping in mind too. Good vibes are great, but they don't necessarily win you titles. Talent and your roster does. And that's the most important thing. So, definitely want to see that get upgraded. But Todd with the facts says, curious to see what this team does in the playoffs before making any major roster moves. I'm with you on that. I want to see what this team does. Kind of as simple as that. I think it could be really good. So we'll find out. Look, we've gone a little bit longer here. I appreciate y'all hanging out with me on a little Locked On Pelicans After Dark. This was a lot of fun. Great win for the Pelicans here. So we're going to wrap up the show here. Let me get some sleep. It's going to be a long day tomorrow, waiting on all the rumors, waiting on things to happen. There's Mardi Gras parades. I'll be out at Muses. That's going to be a lot of fun. So I appreciate y'all hanging out with me here on Locked On Pelicans Live after a big time win. Do me a favor, become an everyday or listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And, we hopefully get some news tomorrow, and it has a lot of fun here. So I appreciate y'all being with me. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison.